Welcome to LUTV News in Focus. We feature interesting topics on campus, in the community, and in the world of culture. I am Tommy Byers. With a war breaking out in Eastern Europe between Russia and Ukraine, many Americans are left asking, how does this conflict affect us? Dr. Thomas Sowers joins us to answer that question. Dr. Sowers studies international conflict and is now teaching a course in international law at Lamar University. Thank you, Dr. Sowers, for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for the last 3 decades, the United States has imported several million barrels of petroleum and other liquids from Russia. There is talks of current sanctions happening right now. What do these sanctions mean for the United States?
Well, it's interesting because the sanctions specifically did not target Russian oil. So the impacts you're seeing at the pump are actually entirely driven by businesses choosing not to interact with Russia. There's actually no sanctions going on Russian oil. It's other areas of Russia's economy that's been sanctioned. So this is right now essentially just businesses choosing not to do business with Russia. There might be further sanctions in the future, but right now this is basically businesses making choices. This isn't the government.
And speaking of businesses making decisions, according to the Bloomberg.com, this is the longest the Russian stock market has been closed since 1989. What impacts does this closure have on world trade and the U.S. market?
Not too much on the U.S. market. Anytime you have something like this, investors get kind of fretty everywhere. But the Russian economy is not that large, really, when you think about it. And so our interactions with them are fairly minimal compared to something like China or the European Union or Japan. And so the effects on the economy in America are a lot more psychological than actual concrete at this point. It's people being fearful of something bad happening and kind of reacting more than not having access to things.
So it's just individuals running out and purchasing supplies that maybe they shouldn't be worried about purchasing at this time?
Or dumping stocks that they might not need to. So that's where you really see it. You see a lot of businesses divesting themselves from Russian interests right now, and that's going to have a little bit long-term impact. But right now, the impacts are more people making choices versus actually necessitated by what's going on.
And following the invasion, several countries, including the United States, have imposed sanctions on Russia. And a lot of these are talking about investors and going into SWIFT. What does SWIFT do for the economy?
Okay, so when you're imposing sanctions, your goal is to have a sanction that hurts the target but doesn't affect you very much. And so the SWIFT sanctions are really preventing them from moving their money around. And so that hampers their ability to move their capital and convert foreign currency to their currency. And so that's really what that is. So that, if done correctly, shouldn't actually affect senders like the United States very much at all. It should mostly target their economy and hamper their economy. So the SWIFT sanctions should not actually have too much of an impact outside of Russia.
And speaking of foreign currency, the Time.com has reported that the ruble has dropped 26%. What does this drop in Russian currency mean for the U.S. dollar?
Once again, this is much more Russian impact than the U.S. impact. So what it would mean is we could buy Russian goods very cheaply, but we're not buying from Russia right now. And what it means is they are going to have a lot more to buy foreign goods. So a very devalued ruble means that they have to have a lot more money to buy anything being made outside of their country. So it's very hard for them to import and be very cheap for people to buy stuff from Russia, but they're not selling stuff we're not buying from Russia right now. So that would be the impact.
On the topic of impacts between Russia and the United States, in 1994, Russia, the United States, and England joined in Budapest to sign the Budapest Memorandum of Security Assurance. Mm-hmm. What does this insurance mean for foreign policies?
Okay, so what was happening in 1994? You're looking at the breakdown of the Soviet Union a few years earlier than that, and you wanted to make sure that you limit the number of nuclear powers. And so Ukraine really insisted on having foreign assurances for security in exchange for giving up their nuclear weapons back to Russia. And so that was the impetus of that agreement. And of course, that agreement is not working currently. But that was the motivation. So it was to get basically nuclear weapons out of Ukraine in exchange for foreign security assurances.
And speaking of insurance policies or insurance currencies, with the outbreak of this conflict and Russia being a part of the signing, did they break their agreement?
Oh, yeah. 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 In international relations, treaties, they get broken all the time. So it's not that surprising. So yeah, treaties frequently get broken in international relations. And so we don't see this as a huge surprise in the field. This is not something that you would expect to, be shocking or anything of that nature.
And so speaking of things to expect or, foreign policies, should the United States be doing more based on their signing?
My opinion is no. What you have here is you have a situation of nuclear power, and you have, a risk of escalation, and you do not want escalation. So the U.S. is using primarily financial tools. They're providing military assistance to Ukraine. They're doing things to avoid a direct military conflict with Russia that could escalate. And anything more they would be doing would probably be in the realm of a direct military conflict with Russia. And so I don't think the U.S. or the West have much of an appetite for that. I think this is primarily going to be a financial war from the U.S. side.
And speaking of the West and the U.S., after World War II, we joined NATO. NATO was formed. So can you help us understand NATO just a little bit more?
Okay. NATO was originally a very unique treaty that actually targeted the Soviet Union. Very few treaties have an actual target. And so it was a security agreement for protection against Soviet aggression in Europe. And after the Cold War ended in 1989 or 1991, depending on what date you want to use, Russia has been fearful of a NATO expansion eastward towards them. And one of the main causes of this conflict right now is a Russian security fear about NATO moving into the Ukraine. Ukraine would like very much to be part of NATO and very much to be part of the European Union. And so the Soviet Union, Russia sees that as a threat. And so they see that as a threat, and you have that expansion eastward. So it's, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, or it's either seen as a security assurance or a threat. So.
And real quickly, recently several countries have condemned the actions during a UN meeting. Mm-hmm. What does this condemnation mean moving forward?
Short answer, nothing. The UN has two levels of sanctions, okay? They have a level of sanctions that can come from the General Assembly that is symbolic, which is what this is. And then they have a sanction that can come out of the Security Council. The Security Council has 5 permanent members: the United States, Britain, France, China, and Russia. And any one of those 5 can veto any actions. So since Russia has a seat on the Security Council, there's going to be no permanent sanction coming out of the UN because they'll just simply veto it. Mm-hmm. So the UN action is very symbolic at this point, but it's not actually something that international relations-wise is legally binding, whereas something out of the Security Council would be legally binding.
Well, thank you, Dr. Sowers, for joining us today, and thank you for watching LUTV News in Focus. To see more content from LUTV News, follow us on Twitter and like us on Facebook.